We now cross live to New York, where our U.S. business correspondent Caroline Woods is waiting to give us the latest. Hi, Caroline. Now let's start with the markets. We have about an hour to go before the opening bell. Does it look like the markets will continue their recovery today?
Hi there, Idia. Yes, actually, taking a look at the futures, it looks like we might be able to continue that recovery. Dow futures are about 200 points higher, 0.8%. Nasdaq futures up about 48 points right now, 0.75%. S&P futures up about 0.7%. Granted, as you said, we still have about an hour to go, so anything can happen, but so far, it looks like investors are cautiously optimistic that Washington and Beijing could be on the verge of a trade deal. Now, President Trump has been mum about the stock market for quite a while, but he's back to tweeting about it this morning. He weighed in saying, economic numbers look really good. Can you imagine if I had long-term zero interest rates to play with like the past administration, rather than rapidly raised normalized rates we have today? That would have been so easy, he said. Still, markets up big since the 2016 election. So not touting 2018's gains, which are no longer, but now talking about gains since the 2016 election. Now, yesterday, trade optimism gave a boost to stocks. Taking a look at the closing numbers, the Dow added 98 points, just under 0.5%. The Nasdaq saw the most impressive gains, up 1.2%. The S&P 500 rose 0.7%. So green arrows across the board. And these pre-market gains come as dozens of officials from the world's two largest economies are in ongoing talks to resolve their trade dispute. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross told CNBC yesterday that both global powers could reach a settlement they can live with, and that addresses all the key issues. Now, China's foreign ministry previously said Beijing had good faith to work with Washington to reach an agreement before that March deadline. That being said, there are many analysts that remain skeptical about the likelihood of both sides brokering a comprehensive trade deal. Meanwhile, taking a look at oil prices, they are rising, supported by trade hopes, and OPEC-led supply cuts also really are tightening markets. U.S. crude right now is up 1.4% at $49.20 a barrel. Brent crude is up 1.4% at $58.14 a barrel. And one stock to watch today is Tesla. Oracle founder Larry Ellison revealed a $1 billion stake in the electric car maker in a filing. That makes him the second biggest individual investor in Tesla, so we'll see if that moves the stock at all today.
Well, Caroline, speaking of stocks, the U.S. has a new most valuable company. Who holds the crown now?
Well, Idia, it's Amazon's turn to hold that coveted title. The e-commerce giant surpassed Microsoft as the most valuable publicly traded company in the U.S. The shift occurred yesterday after Amazon shares rose over 3% to close with a market valuation of $797 billion, or $1,629 per share. Meanwhile, the computer software makers Microsoft stock edged up by less than 1%, leaving the value at $784 billion. Now, this marks the first time Amazon has held the top spot and ends Microsoft's brief return to the crown after it surpassed Apple back in late November. I will say Amazon did briefly top Apple and Microsoft early last month, you may remember, but it didn't hold that #1 spot. Now, Amazon has actually had a higher valuation. You may remember Amazon's market cap topped $1 trillion back in September, but that late-year stock market collapse resulted in the worst quarter for the shares since the 2008 recession. Nevertheless, it has rallied in 3 of the first 4 trading days of 2019, is at #1 with that market valuation of $797 million. So this #1 spot has been changing hands quite a bit these days, so we'll see how long Amazon can hold the crown.
Well, Caroline, it's a different story, though, for struggling retailer Sears. Now, the one-time icon could close its doors for good today. What do we know about that?
Well, sources are telling CNBC that Sears and its chairman, Eddie Lampert, so far have been unable to resolve disagreements over Lampert's $4.4 billion bid to save Sears by buying it out of bankruptcy through his hedge fund, ESL. That move would save some 50,000 jobs. Now, Sears continues to move toward liquidation. Last week, its advisors told the bankruptcy judge it planned to announce a liquidation on Monday, so yesterday, but then Sears decided it would give ESL until Tuesday morning, so this morning, before coming to and announcing a conclusion. That's according to sources. CNBC says ESL's advisors worked through the weekend and into Monday. So far, Lampert's bid is insufficient. Now, if he doesn't agree to concessions, the company will liquidate. As you said, Sears was once an American icon, but it will be lights out for the retailer unless Lampert can sweeten his deal. So a big day for Sears, but could be a sad one, especially for those 50,000 employees. And with Amazon now the most valuable publicly traded company and Sears possibly shutting its doors, really shows how retail has changed over the years.
Absolutely, Caroline. I absolutely really used to love Sears. Well, okay, maybe I just loved shopping, but it's really sad to see this happen. Now, you mentioned trade. A day after U.S. officials met their Chinese counterparts, there's been a breakthrough on import approvals. Tell us more about that.
Yes, China approved 5 genetically modified crops for import on Tuesday. Now, this is today. This is the first time in about 18 months, so it could boost its overseas grain purchases. It could also ease pressure from the United States to open its markets for China to open its markets to more farm goods. Now, the U.S. is the world's biggest producer of genetically modified crops, while China is the top importer of genetically modified soybeans and canola. U.S. farmers and global seed companies have long complained about Beijing's slow and unpredictable process for approving these crops for import, really adding fuel to the trade tensions between the world's 2 largest economies. Now, the approvals were announced on the Agriculture Ministry's website and, of course, were granted while that U.S. trade delegation is meeting with its counterparts in Beijing this week. A China representative of a U.S. Agricultural Industry Association called it a goodwill gesture towards the resolution of the trade issue. Now, 2 of the newly approved products had been waiting some 6 years for permission. So this is a long time coming, though there were 5 products known to be seeking approvals that were not given the green light. Now, until now, China had not approved any genetically modified crops for import since July of 2017, when it cleared 2 products following high-level talks with Washington. It also approved 2 products back in June of 2017. So this is being taken as a positive signal, kind of paving the way for China to import large volumes of U.S. soybeans in the future. That 90-day truce reached last month already prompted a resumption of U.S. soybean purchases. Buying had really slumped after China imposed that 25% import duty on U.S. shipments of oilseeds back in July. China is the world's biggest soybean consumer and has so far purchased only about 5 million tons of the 2018 U.S. soy harvest, which is just a fraction of its typical purchases. The U.S. has demanded that China change its genetically modified crop import application process to make it more transparent and timely and based on scientific methods. However, some warn that the latest approvals should not be taken as a sign that China is conceding to those demands. One source said it's just another piece of evidence that China's approval process is not entirely scientific, but also political. That being said, it seems like a step in the right direction here.
Well, hopefully, Caroline, and I can't wait to see how these talks unfold. Now, President Trump is set to give a speech tonight to plead his case for that border wall with Mexico. So how do you think this will impact the government shutdown?
That's right. President Trump announced plans to deliver a primetime address to the nation at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Public appeal is expected to focus, as you said, on the standoff over his proposed $5 billion border wall that has shut down large chunks of the federal government. Now, the partial government shutdown is now in week 3, and unfortunately, there's still no end in sight. Analysts are speculating a few different possible scenarios about how this could play out, though. First, there could be a compromise as the closure of a quarter of the government begins to hurt the economy. Both sides could give ground and do a deal, possibly based on the following factors. Maybe Trump offers to protect the dreamers from deportation in exchange for wall money. These are the people living in the U.S. after being brought into the country illegally as children. Maybe there won't be a wall, but rather a barrier. Trump has talked about steel fencing, and some tall slated fences are already in place on the border, and some more are being built. Funding for the slats could let Trump declare victory and let Democrats say they blocked a wall. Instead, it's a barrier. Or maybe they'll take other steps to fortify the border, maybe more all-terrain vehicles, more border guards on horses, large metal detectors so they can scan trucks and buses for illegal activities. There's also a chance they could reach a compromise somewhere between Trump's demand for $5 billion and the Democrats' offer of $1.6 billion for border security. Now, Trump has also threatened to declare a national emergency, claiming that illegal immigration jeopardizes U.S. security, which would empower him to redirect existing federal funds to build his wall. Perhaps he would tap into the Defense Department budget. Now, under the Constitution, Congress can make spending decisions or decisions about spending U.S. taxpayers' money. However, Trump would almost certainly face a legal challenge if he does, in fact, do this. Another scenario, maybe the Democrats give in. However, Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have vowed they will not give Trump any money to build a wall, and it seems unlikely that they'll cave given the recent political climate. Finally, maybe Trump gives in. His main responsibility as president is to make sure that the federal government carries out its duties, so he could find the shutdown maybe too politically hazardous. Closed national parks and museums is one thing, but federal airport security screeners now working without pay. They've begun calling in sick, potentially causing delays for air travelers. That could be a different story. Whatever the case, Trump has promised for years to build his wall, initially saying Mexico would pay for it. He's repeatedly attacked Democrats for standing in his way. We'll see if he finds the shutdown unsustainable, though he too has said he's willing to keep the government shut down for as long as it takes. So it also could be a long road ahead.
Well, Caroline, there may be more tension in this than the tension with the U.S. and China, because I do not see Trump or the Democrats backing down. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to discuss this. Arise U.S. business correspondent there, Caroline Woods.